Welcome to a new edition of In the District. Today we're sitting down with the Commissioner of the New York City Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, Manuel Castro. We're talking about recent development with asylum seekers, the convening of Cities for Action members, and his recent trip to Latin America with Mayor Eric Adams. I'm Brittany Aubain, and this program is brought to you from BronxNet's brand new Media and Technology Studios at La Central in the South Bronx. Commissioner Castro, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Brittany, for inviting me to join.
Of course. So before we sat down, you got a really nice tour of our facilities. As a film alumni yourself, you studied some film. What is your opinion?
I'm incredibly impressed. More than anything, I want to thank the leadership here, Michael, everyone who's been working towards this for, I know, some time now. Mm-hmm. I grew up in a neighborhood similar to the South Bronx here in New York City, and I know how important it is to have facilities such as these in our own neighborhoods where we don't have to travel to Manhattan or anywhere else to access such technology. So I commend everyone for making this possible. And I know it will influence a lot of young people to get into the industry and, like yourself, like myself, find careers in this kind of field. It's so important that this is here today.
Thank you for mentioning that. And what I also wanted to kind of ask is the importance of media literacy, media training. At BronxNet, we're really big on education here. So let's talk about that, having a facility for literacy and training right here in the South Bronx. What do you think about that?
So, like you mentioned, I did go to film school. Mm-hmm. I was part of a program that, brought children or high school students from the inner city, right, from immigrant neighborhoods in New York City into studios such as these, where we learn how to use the technology, but more importantly, how to communicate. Mm-hmm. And so now, I am working in government. Prior to this, I worked in the nonprofit world as an advocate, as an activist, and I got so much out of learning how to communicate well with an audience and how to work with colleagues to produce, videos and media to spread a message, right, and to reach people. And I think that's an incredible skill set to develop. And again, I think the community here in the South Bronx and the Bronx in general will benefit tremendously from having a space such as this. And I know that many great journalists and producers have come out of the BronxNet. I'm sure that in the future, many people will look to this space as a space that changed their lives.
Absolutely. It's always so interesting when you speak with people who work in government and you kind of realize, they're multifaceted, right? You think about what they did, before taking office. Mm-hmm. But, let's talk about your journey here now. Yes. You were appointed in 2022. So can you tell us about what your role as the Commissioner of MOIA entails? How does it contribute to the community?
Yeah, so my office is in particularly interested in the well-being of immigrants, all immigrants, recently arrived immigrants, and also longer-term immigrants. So anything that involves integrating immigrants, supporting immigrants in their lives here, whether it's legal services, English learning, language access, translation, interpretation, all of that falls within my office. We work very collaborative with other agencies, so the Department of Social Services, Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, the Department of Education, to serve the very large immigrant community in New York. Over 3 million New Yorkers were not born in this country. Many of them are naturalized citizens, many are not. So we have a big responsibility to look after their well-being. And again, we have a lot of newly arrived immigrants into the city who are just learning how to navigate the many things that they need to learn to settle here in New York City. And so we've been spending a lot of time in serving that community. But we're also mindful that we've had immigrant communities here that have been here for a while, and we need to serve them as well. And so I spend a lot of time in the Bronx working with the Latino community here, the African community, to make sure that we're trying to meet their needs, and working with civil society and our partners, faith-based groups, to make sure that people's rights are respected, where they need support, they have access to support, and most importantly, that they are able to trust government. Because if they're a victim of a crime, if they need our support, they need to be able to trust us and come forward call their local precinct, go to the hospital if there's an emergency. That's really important because immigrants, especially newly arrived, are fearful of government. So, what I try to do is share my own personal story as well. I migrated here when I was 5 years old. I crossed the Mexico-U.S. border with my mother, and I had many of the same experiences that immigrants have had. I grew up undocumented here. I was part of that wave of young people who grew up undocumented here, and we had to start a sort of a social movement to say, we're here chasing our dreams. I wanted to be a filmmaker. I wanted to go to college, and coming together and organizing as a community. And so I became an activist and then an advocate, and nonprofit leader. I was the executive director of a nonprofit, and so you see my journey to now as a commissioner. The mayor wanted someone who've had that lived experience and can talk from lived experience about what it's like to be an immigrant here and the contributions that we bring to our great city.
Sometimes when you have lived experience, when you're dealing with people who are going through the same situation, sometimes it's hard because you do have to remain professional and kind of remove yourself from the situation. So with that, can you talk about maybe some of the challenges of your job and some of the more rewarding parts of it?
Yes, I think this is something that I'm sure folks, watching understand. The city, we want to be as helpful and humanitarian as possible to the thousands of people that are arriving each week to the city. Many of them have crossed many borders, the Darien Gap, a jungle, quite literally, have had a really difficult time to getting to the country. And now they're arriving to our city initially because, Governor Abbott in Texas started to bus people here without coordinating with us. We want to be as helpful and humanitarian as possible, like I said, but we just don't have all the resources that we need to be able to help everyone that arrives with everything, I wish we could provide to them. In particular, housing, right? We have a housing shortage in the city. I mean, New Yorkers know this. It's an incredibly expensive city to live in. If you're moving here from any other state, even if you're not an immigrant, you have to really, as we say, hustle, right, to get to settle here. And so I want to make sure that we continue to support people, but also to be mindful that we might be a city of immigrants, but not a city of unlimited resources, which is why we've been very vocal that without the support of the federal government, we just can't continue to do as much as we have been. That's really difficult because, again, I myself welcome people as they arrive in the bus stations or elsewhere. I'm usually the first person that they get to know. And I talk to asylum seekers and migrants every day, and I have to tell them, there's only so much we can do. We're not the federal government, and that's really difficult. I wish we could do more.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of your, roles as commissioner is you take part in Cities for Action, which is a coalition launched in 2014 of nearly 180 mayors advocating for pro-immigrant federal policies and inclusive programming. So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I think that's an important initiative to highlight because, a lot of cities, a lot of mayors and county executives across the country are dealing with the same issues. We're a local government after all. We're New York City government. We're the biggest local government, let's say, in the country, but we still have constraints. We have a budget that we need to adhere to and maintain. Again, we don't have the kind of resources that the state government or federal government have. So we need to come together as local governments, mayors, and my counterparts, either commissioners or directors of immigrant affairs offices from across the country to talk about how do we best welcome and support immigrants who are arriving, people who have a lot of needs. And again, the biggest issue, and again, folks in the Bronx know this, housing is a huge issue. Our shelter system is not meant to be permanent housing. And, migrants know this. I talk to them a lot. About 80% of the people who have been leaving our system, they do find their own rooms and their own housing. They don't want to stay in shelters permanently. But those who do not find housing or another option, again, it's a tough place to settle. And so people across the country are dealing with the same thing in Chicago, in San Diego, but you name it, where migrants are arriving. We're trying to come together as local governments and cities to say, okay, how do we work together to best support people that are arriving everywhere, and also advocate for support from the federal government? Because again, immigration is a federal issue. Mm-hmm. Us here in the city, we don't have the authority to provide a work permit, for instance. For us, it's essential, the mayor says this over and over, work permits are really important because if people don't have the right to work, they're going to either work informally, meaning without authorization, opens them up for labor exploitation, other issues that come up, or they have to depend on the local government for support, like shelter, food, and so on, because they can't work. Mm-hmm. So the federal government needs to start to listen to cities like ours, because we're the ones that have to manage I think the human suffering that you see, of people who arrive and they don't understand why is it that they can't work. They were allowed into the country. Legal support is really expensive. There's very little of it. I'm trying my best to support as many people as possible. And our immigration system has been broken for a long time. I'm sure some of your viewers know immigrants who've been here for decades waiting for a work permit can tell you our immigration system needs to be fixed. That can only happen at the federal level, which is why we're bringing everyone together here in New York. We have people from all over the country who are going to be here in our city to talk about these really important issues.
Well, I think that's a fantastic way, like you said, to kind of get everybody together, discuss these issues, and come up with an action plan moving forward. So we do have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about so much more, including your trip with Mayor Eric Adams. It's time to take a quick break. When we return, we will continue our conversation with Commissioner Castro. Stay tuned.
I remember when the Bronx did not really have a media outlet properly representing the people of the Bronx.
BronxNet provides for the community by being a community where people can be empowered to share their voices.
We are in a really great place technologically. We've got all the resources that we need to be effective.
Whether it's through cameras, storytelling, editing, we have provided those services for 30 years.
BronxNet's mission is to be a voice for the community.
To educate, to inform, and to inspire.
And you can be a part of it. We've built studios for you.
Only 57% of New York City high school students are college ready by their senior year. .5% of high school graduates either have no plans to attend college or are uncertain that they will ever attend. .34% of young adults don't go to college because they can't afford it. Discover what's possible. BronxNet's education programs, internships, and opportunities help engage and inspire Bronx youth and beyond to pursue their passions. Be a part of the BronxNet family. Whether you're interested in our shows, joining a class, or donating to support our mission, visit BronxNet.org to learn more.
Welcome back. You're watching a new edition of In the District with the Commissioner of the New York City Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, Manuel Castro. Let's get back into it. So before the break, I had touched lightly on your trip to Latin America with Mayor Eric Adams. Can you tell us about it?
Well, it was a really important trip for us to take because it not only gave us a sense of what was happening in Latin America, in a way that I don't think you can get from just reading a story or like watching a YouTube video. I think it's important to be there to really get a sense of why is it that people are having to go on this journey, get the perspective from those who are working to support migrants on the ground. So we met with nonprofit organizations, non-governmental organizations, and government entities that are also trying to grapple with the same things we're trying to grapple with. And so, for instance, I met a nun in Mexico City, with the mayor, who was so eloquent about the need for the federal government, again, we keep hearing this, to do more, because she runs a shelter that she'd usually help 100 people, but she had 1,000 people, 800 of them sleeping outside, her building. And she spoke about issues that we have been speaking about the last year and a half. She has been talking about this for years. So it's clear to us that we need to be in close contact and collaboration with these different entities along the journey of the migrants that are arriving. Not just Latin Americans, but we're seeing a lot of migrants from West Africa, for instance. Many of them actually come and settle here in the Bronx, that arrive in Latin America, and then they make their way up to New York or to the United States. I think it was a very moving experience. The first stop was to the Basilica of the Virgin of Guadalupe with the mayor. I wanted to show the mayor, this is one of the stops that all migrants make, those who are Catholic at least, to say, please, to the Virgin of Guadalupe, for Mexicans, is an important figure. Take care of me along this journey. And I wanted to share that because this was one of the steps that my mother and I made when we decided to immigrate, and one of my earliest memories as a child. And that set us out on this journey to visit a couple of places in Mexico, Ecuador, and then Colombia, and then the Darien Gap, which is one of the deadliest, most treacherous routes in the journey. It's a quite literal jungle. And people are risking their lives to migrate. And it's not an easy decision. People don't make that decision lightly. They certainly are not going to make this decision just to come here and depend on the government. They want to work. They want an opportunity for their families. Which, again, everything's connected. We're bringing all the cities together because the federal government needs to be mindful of what's happening. And when they're allowing asylum seekers in, they need to complete the job and do more for them to settle in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like, once again, we're kind of going back into that lived experience. Like you mentioned, this isn't something that you can just find answers to from watching a video or seeing something on social media. Sometimes you have to kind of go into it yourself to really understand what's going on. So given the findings and what you discovered on your trip, what are some of these next steps that, your office plans to take?
Look, we're incredibly concerned. Obviously, it's getting cold out there. This is one of the coldest, times of the year. And it's not just for those migrants who are here in the city, but also across northern states. I think Chicago's having a hard time, too. Places in Massachusetts who have been welcoming asylum seekers. We're at a point where we've been saying this is going to be really difficult at this point for a while now. Obviously, we mentioned that we had to do some budget cuts, because we have to find the money to pay for this. We spent almost $2 billion in this response without much help from the federal government. And so we're at a moment, a critical juncture, where we really need the support from the federal government. They need to step in and do more. Otherwise, we're going to see people suffer. And that's something that I'm very concerned about. We do not want to see families, especially children, out in the street in this weather. So it's important for us to come together as a city and, call our Congress members, call our federal representatives and say, now's the time to act.
Absolutely, and thank you for mentioning that. And I read recently that 2 other asylum application places are open. So can you give us a little bit more information? Where can our viewers go? What does that look like?
Well, in terms of shelter, we have over 200 sites where people are, finding shelter, those asylum seekers that are recently arrived. But we're still seeing about 10,000 people arrive each week. So when they arrive, we have to find those beds and accommodations for them to stay, especially families with children. Now, we open an asylum application center where people can go. They get referred to to decide by the shelters they're staying or the nonprofits we work with. Many of them are here locally. We work closely with Catholic Charities, for instance. They have a big presence here in the South Bronx. They can always connect with Catholic Charities. They'll connect with us or some of the smaller CBOs here. And obviously calling 311, that's the easiest way to reach us. Again, I'm a big fan of 311. I know people, there's challenges, but it's one of those resources that certainly we get connected to the community through, and folks can call in their own language, and you'll get someone in your own language to then connect to us, and then we'll be able to help. Whether you just arrive from like a place from West Africa or Asia or Latin America, we'll do our best to find the support that you need. Again, we're struggling because we're seeing 10,000 people arrive each month, and anyone who knows anything about logistics knows that that's actually quite difficult because you need to provide not just shelter but a lot of other supports to people. We're just asking for the support from New Yorkers to also step in and help as much as possible their local communities. Basically, all churches are at some level involved, for instance, whether it's food drives or coat drives, food pantries, you name it. I think there's a lot of need out there, and this is a good time to help if you can.
Absolutely. I want to say I think it's great that you mentioned just the severity and the difficulty, right? Because we hear it all the time, we see it in the news, but once again, it's something that we're not necessarily in, and we're not understanding the severity of it. Like you mentioned, 10,000 each month, that's a lot of people. It is getting extremely cold out, and a lot of them are struggling to find permanent living spaces, and also they're being given these 30-day notices after being in shelters. And unfortunately, it's just like the cycle begins again. So when it comes to New Yorkers stepping in, you mentioned going to churches, are we talking donations? What are we talking in ways that they could help?
Well, certainly donations, certainly helping your local community organization, local church, calling us to see how we can connect you to a place where you can support. What has been amazing is that people that are getting these 30-day notices or 60-day notices, a lot of them are finding housing. Actually, that's a story that hasn't been shared enough. There is a small percentage, about 20% that are not. They're coming back to us to try and get another placement. But about 80% are finding some sort of living arrangement, whether here in the city or elsewhere. And that's in large part because New Yorkers are coming forward and they're saying, well, I have a room available for you, or like, you can stay with me. That, to me, is so important because that's how usually immigrants come to the city and settle. I mean, certainly my family, when we came here, we had to stay with a relative for a few months before we can find our own, place to live. And a lot of the migrants who are arriving don't have that existing network or family or friend, so they need that. They need to connect with more people that are willing to help out. I know it's hard because space is limited in New York. We all know this. But they're finding housing because people are coming forward to say, okay, you work with me. I know you just arrived. Come stay with us. Come stay with our family. I know it's a hard thing to do for New Yorkers because obviously tight spaces, but somehow people are finding their way. Last thing I'll say is that asylum seekers understand. I talk to them often, and they tell me they've been in the shelter for a year now. They're like, we know that we need to make room for those who are just coming, those who have just made the journey, and those that need support. You've helped us a lot, right? No other city has helped us like New York. We understand we now need to move on to the next step. And I think that's been amazing to watch. But the city is really, we're in this situation because we haven't had the support we desperately need from the federal government. And that's what we've been saying all year. And now this is a really important juncture. So that's why we have to, as New York, push really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think, you mentioned that sometimes people are like, hey, you work with me, come stay with me. I think that's the beauty of New Yorkers. Sometimes they do get a really bad rep, I guess, for being tough. But I think when somebody needs a hand, New Yorkers are always there to kind of lend that hand, and I think that's something that is really nice to see. But going back to kind of this lived experience, and you at the top of the show spoke about your experience at 5 years old migrating here, and you also were one of the first generation of dreamers to help fight for that right to education. So with everything in your experience, can you tell me why go into government after that? What was it that kind of drove you to this position?
Certainly. I think more people with lived experience should consider working for government. You know, government has an important role in obviously helping local communities, people who need support, but also policymaking. You know, a lot of what I do is inform policy. I'm an advisor to the mayor, to deputy mayors, to other people who are making important decisions. And obviously I make a lot of decisions. And it's best that those decisions are rooted in lived experience and in what is actually happening in the community. So when you come from the community, you know how to go to the community and speak with them. So I spend a lot of time in the neighborhood. And I think, you know, I hear from people who are like, well, you're giving everything to the asylum seekers. What about us, right? I come with that perspective, you know, and I think it really informs policy making, decision making, how we structure programs, how we respond to crises. Again, it's important for New Yorkers to consider, you know, like maybe a role in government is important if you want things to truly reflect what people want.
Commissioner Castro, I think that was a great place to leave this interview. Thank you so much for discussing your journey and the work you're doing now. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Thanks to everyone for watching, and remember, you can always watch this program anytime, anywhere on BronxNet.org and on YouTube. And while you're there, make sure to follow BronxNet on social media to find out who will be the next leader we'll sit down with on In the District from BronxNet's Media and Technology Studios at La Central in the South Bronx. Talk soon.